Joining me now is Senior Editor-at-Large at Newsweek, Josh Hammer. Josh, Republicans have slammed Democrat Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal after she called for balanced criticism of the Israel-Hamas war when asked on CNN why so many progressives were silent about Hamas's barbaric assaults against Israeli women, including mass rape and slaughter.
I've seen a lot of progressive women, generally speaking, they're quick to defend women's rights and speak out against using rape as a weapon of war, but downright silent on what we saw on October 7th.
I've condemned what Hamas has done. I've condemned
specifically
all of
women?
the actions. Absolutely.
You turned it back to Israel. I'm asking you about Hamas.
I already answered your question, Dana. I said it's horrific, and
okay.
I think that rape is horrific, sexual assault is horrific. I think that it happens in war situations. Terrorist organizations like Hamas obviously are using these as tools. However, I think we have to be balanced about bringing in the outrages against Palestinians.
Josh, there were quite a few buts and howevers in that entire exchange that went for a couple of minutes. And as it was pointed out to the Congresswoman during the interview, it's not just a function of conflict. We don't see Israeli soldiers going house to house and raping Palestinian women. Why are so many on the left reluctant to acknowledge what really happened on October 7, including the horrendous treatment of Israeli women?
Rita, unfortunately, that very dark question has an exceedingly straightforward and simple answer, which is that Jew hatred is the world's oldest. It is the original bigotry that mankind developed thousands and thousands of years ago, and tragically, it exists today and is currently in vogue. It is more fashionable than it has ever been. That is obviously what is going on here. The congressman in question here, who is a far-left congresswoman from Washington State, she is pals with AOC. She is pals with Ilhan Omar and the rest of the Jew-hating so-called squad. She referred to Israel as a so-called apartheid state at a far-left conference in Austin, Texas earlier this year. She tried to walk those comments back. Nancy Pelosi was giving her a helping hand and trying to walk those comments back. But it's obvious that there are two separate standards when it comes to Jews and not Jews in the minds of the current woke, addled, leftist Democratic Party. If you are Jewish, then you do not get the benefit of the doubt. By the way, this is the same congresswoman who, along with all of those other names, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Nancy Pelosi, yourself, they were all up in arms, of course, during the Me Too movement. That wasn't that long ago. What happened to believe all women, Rita? What happened to believe all women? Apparently, we have to have an asterisk next to believe all women, put an asterisk at the bottom of the document that says, unless they are Jewish. If they're Jewish, then no, you automatically side with their genocidal, annihilationist, subjugationist, jihadist foes, not these innocent Jewish women who happen to be Israeli, who happen to live in the Gaza envelope, in the communities near Gaza. It's just disgusting stuff, really. I mean, good for Dana Bash, honestly. You know, credit where credit is due. CNN has not necessarily been, shall we say, the best when it comes to this conflict, but good for her. Good for her for pushing back here. I would have pushed back, frankly, quite a bit further, but this is morally obtuse stuff. It should be discredited. It should be objected to. It should be condemned by any person with any fiber of morality, frankly, in their being.
And you're so right. The very same voices were very outspoken during the Me Too movement. And this particular congresswoman also treated unsubstantiated allegations against Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh at the time as gospel truth. In fact, she tweeted out, Dr. Blasey Ford, the accuser there, has shown herself to be brave, compelling and absolutely credible. We owe it to her and to sexual assault survivors everywhere to not confirm Kavanaugh. Of course, Kavanaugh was confirmed, but the double standards you mentioned there are apparent over and over again. Now, I want to play you a clip here, incredible really, from a Democrat strategist, James Carville, who launched this astonishing attack against the new leader of the House, Republican Mike Johnson, claiming that he's a Christian nationalist that poses a greater threat to America than terrorist group Al-Qaeda. Here he is on Bill Maher's program.
Mike Johnson and what he believes is one of the greatest threats we have today to the United States. When I promise you, I know these people.
Well, you're talking about Christian nationalism.
Absolutely.
Talking about
this is a bigger threat than Al-Qaeda to this country. And let me tell you something. The Speaker of the House, they got probably at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe more.
Josh, I thought James Carville was supposed to be an old school, sensible Democrat. He seems utterly demented there.
Well, he actually might be. I mean, he literally might be senile in his old age. I mean, Jimmy Carville, came to form 30 plus years ago in the 1992 Bill Clinton campaign. Back then, he was a Clinton Democrat, but, he's trying to stay politically relevant just as the rest of the old Democratic Party guard is. Joe Biden is actually a decent analog here. So Joe Biden back in the day was actually pro-life insofar as he called for Roe versus Wade to be overturned. He said that he himself personally was pro-life, was anti-abortion. Joe Biden had any number of other more moderate issues, too. He was a leading proponent of the 1994 crime bill that Bill Clinton signed. All these guys, whether it's Jimmy Carver, whether it's Bill Clinton, they are all now pivoting to try to stay relevant and keep on getting these TV hits like Bill Maher, because otherwise they're just so out of lockstep with the rabid far-left progressive wokerati that comprises today's Democratic Party. And, it really is sad. I fear that Jimmy Carville probably has started to go off the rails. So, he actually teaches a course at Tulane University in New Orleans, and my brother, my only sibling, actually took that course. In fact, my brother was actually Jimmy Carville's token. He's actually his token Republican, his token conservative in the class. They had a nice rapport, those two. That was probably 8 or 9 years ago or so. So I do fear that this probably has only happened in recent years. But as the Democratic Party, just in the post-2017, the post-Trump era, has gone down this ridiculously far-left, culturally hegemonic, oppressive rabbit hole, he's probably just trying to stay relevant because this is total, absolute garbage. Mike Johnson is a Christian who believes in one man, one woman marriage. He believes in the inalienable right to life of the unborn child in the womb and other things that Americans of all political stripes once unanimously agreed upon. His political ideology is right in the middle, frankly, of the Republican caucus. I actually disagree with him when it comes to Ukraine. He's a little more kind of old school, bushy, neoconservative when it comes to conflicts such as that. So I have my own criticisms of Mike Johnson, but the idea that because the man is a self-professed Christian, he is a bigger threat to Al-Qaeda, I mean, get the heck out of here, Jimmy Carville. You've totally lost the plot at that point.
Now to the ongoing border crisis in the US. It's certainly hurting President Joe Biden in the polls. NBC News polling shows the GOP now holds an 18-point lead when it comes to handling immigration. And also there's been recent polls, Josh, showing that Donald Trump is eating into Biden's lead among Latino voters. That would be something that would be concerning the Democrats. And we know a lot of those voters care about this issue. We've seen a few Democrats like Eric Adams speak out about the illegal immigration crisis, but does the Biden White House have any intention to tackle this crisis in any meaningful way in the lead up to the 2024 election?
No, on the contrary, they are suing Ken Paxton, Greg Abbott, in the state of Texas for Texas's attempts to put some buoys in the Rio Grande, trying to secure Texas's territorial sovereignty against the Mexican drug cartels and, frankly, Hezbollah and some radical Islamic groups that control large swaths, operationally speaking, of the U.S.-Mexico border. So they're actually, not only are they not trying to mitigate the damage, they're actually throwing fuel right into the fire, trying to make it worse. Look, Rita, I think that this is the issue. I think that this right now is the issue that Republicans have to run on right now. By the way, in the 2020 election, when Donald Trump, who was extremely hawkish on the border, obviously, was running for re-election, Republicans made unprecedented gains in very Mexican areas there in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. They won multiple counties that were 80, 90% Hispanic there. So this notion that if you talk very tough game on the border and you call for reasonable controls, cracking down on asylum fraud, no to amnesty, all these common sense things, the notion that that will cost you Latino, Hispanic votes is frankly an insult and a slap in the face to many commonsensical Latino and Hispanic voters, many of whom come from traditional Catholic families, actually, as the case may be. So I think that this is really the issue the Republicans should run on. We're coming up here in an election year, going back to what we were just talking about with Speaker Mike Johnson in the House. In the latest episode of my podcast, shameless plug if I may, the Josh Hammer Show, I actually have a segment on the show where I'm giving unsolicited advice to Speaker Johnson and saying that this is the issue, man. Go all in on this issue. Try to pass as much common sense legislation as you can. It is great politics. It is great policy. Alejandro Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, is way out of his league. Impeachment articles should have been filed against him many months ago, as Andy Biggs of Arizona and other hard-right congressmen have called for. So I am all in on the immigration issue. I think Joe Biden is a dead man walking when it comes to this issue, and I hope that Republicans take advantage of that opportunity.
And finally, Josh, we've got more evidence of this two-tier justice system in America. Two BLM writers charged with burning down a Wendy's restaurant in Atlanta in the summer of 2020, the summer of love. Well, they've been fined just $500 each. It just highlights, Josh, this lack of justice, it appears, in the American justice system.
Yeah, and there's so many examples of this, right? So in New York City and San Francisco and many of these big blue metropolises that all too frequently have Soros prosecutors, as they have in New York City and San Francisco, you also see this trend where the DAs, they literally announce in advance they will not prosecute theft, petty larceny up to a certain dollar amount. So in New York City, I think for a little while, it was under $200. So, what is the incentive at that point? Well, you're going to rob $199 worth of merchandise. I mean, you don't need a PhD or anything to figure out what the incentive structure would get you to do. Same thing here. I mean, incentives matter, Rita. I mean, things like this are obviously going to lead to vastly more crime. They're obviously going to lead to much more larceny, theft, robbery, all sorts of things when it comes to. But ultimately, to go back to what we were saying earlier, the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, is the glittering eye of the left. They love the Black Lives Matter movement, notwithstanding the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement happens to be emphatically pro-Hamas, not just pro-Palestinian. Recall earlier in the conflict, about 2 months ago now, the BLM Chicago chapter, they actually ended up deleting it, but they had this galling, horrific image of the Hamas paraglider, and they said, that's all you need to know, folks. But again, the Democratic Party has just gone so far off the deep end. They have become so besotted with this toxic ideology of oppressed versus oppressors, of victimizers versus victims, that they hold BLM, despite all that it stands for, out as the quintessence of what it means to be a liberal organization here. Of course, as you know, Rita, if a white Christian were to do the same thing, I don't have to tell you the fine would be substantially worse.